jumping on just a little bit early, and hopefully the internet is going to stabilize during our talk today.
Pray to the internet.
I know, exactly. If one of us drops off, can you please let us know in the chat? Sometimes we just don't know, or we just keep talking. So thank you all for joining us. Can you do me a favor and let us know where you're calling in from or where you're watching us from? It's great to see everyone. I see that Shannon has her whole class on. She is teaching an intro to visual communication at the College of the Canyons. So Steve, I guess you're teaching her class today.
Oh, good. A freebie.
Yay. So Martin is in New York City and Danielle is in Croatia. Wonderful. Hey, Adrian, she's from Anaheim Hills. Rachel's from Phoenix. Lydia's from New York City, not too far away from you. Cecile's in Costa Rica. We got people from Massachusetts, Los Angeles. Oh my God, it's going fast. LA, DTLA, awesome. Sacramento. Yay. Oh, Workhorse from DC, awesome. Great. And
I never have to go anywhere anymore. This is terrific.
They just come to you, Stephen.
Wow.
I know, it's great. So from Cleveland, Connecticut, Minnesota, awesome. And Paul, you have your design history classes here. Wow, what great timing, actually. Cheryl's in South Pasadena. Jen is in Culver City. Alexandra from LA. Michelle from Vancouver, BC. Omen from Bruin. And hey, guys. Very nice. Thanks for joining us. Alexandra's working on Design Communication Art Certificate in UCLA. Great. Excellent. Good to see everyone. Well, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. I want to ask you to use the share button in the top right-hand corner and let everyone know we're just getting started. If you have any questions, please drop them underneath the question tab, which is in the lower right. I don't know which way is your lower right, but mine is this way, but probably this way, right there, down there. So yeah, I see there's a couple questions already, and also do me a favor and vote the ones that are shared questions up. This way we can get to them quickly. We want to end here within an hour. Steve is in his office at SVA, correct?
Right.
Okay.
East side of New York, a block away from where I was born.
Oh, wow. You've stayed around your corner. Awesome.
I'm afraid so.
Have you ever moved out of New York?
I lived in Sweden very briefly, and I have a house in Connecticut. But other than that, no, New York is my city. I can't think of any place else to go.
That's great. That's wonderful. Great. Well, thank you guys for sharing that out. Let us all know. Hi, Debbie. How are you doing? It's great to have you here. We just have a couple more minutes, so if you'll share that out, that would be great. Carlos from Italy. Excellent. Mr. Heller, congratulations for your career. That's very nice.
Where in Italy is Carlo from?
Carlo, let us know where you're from. And then Richard from Medicino. There you go. Angelina from LA. Great. Thank you guys for letting us know where you're coming from. Hey, Carlo, let us know where in Italy you are calling from. And it is, oh, I guess it's not too late there. It's maybe 6 or 7 o'clock there. So it's not too bad. So when we usually have people from Asia, that's when they're like up all night waiting for these things. Carlo, let us know. Excellent. All right, so we are going to be talking about this book here. I don't know if any of you have it. I noticed a couple people said they had it. The Moderns. So I'm really, really excited to talk about this. Again, let us know if you have any questions. Yay, it's on your Amazon wish list. Perfect. Let us know if you have any questions. Throw it into the question tab, and then we will get started. So today we are having a nice little design history chat. Would you say that's about correct, Stephen?
I'd say we're talking a bit about history, yeah. This
Okay.
is the first time I've done this kind of chat. I mean, I've done Skype and I've done conference, but this is more pleasant. It's almost like you're real.
It's almost like I'm real. Well, yeah, we love these live talks. I've done about 45 of them now. So you know, it's been fun. They have their technical challenges because everyone is live, of course. And sometimes we drop out and things happen, but you know, we live with them because they are real, sometimes more real than we think.
Today will be perfect.
Yes, it would be great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So I'm just really happy that you decided to join us today for our chat today. I'm just going to say hello and welcome to everyone to Typography Dojo. My name is Rachel Elnar and I'm in Los Angeles. I'm the producer of Type Ed, a typography education program here in Los Angeles. Yay, I'm very calming, Steve. I'm glad you think so. I'm just going to read this intro because it's very, very, very long. So we are joined today by Stephen Heller in New York City. He is in his office right now at SVA. He is the co-chair of the SVA, which is the School of Visual Arts, if you don't know already. He's in New York City and the co-chair of the MFA Design / Design as Author Entrepreneur Program. He's an author, co-author, and editor of over 170 books. That's a lot. And for 33 years, he was an art director at the New York Times, originally the op-ed page, and for 30 of those years with the New York Times Book Review. For over 2 decades, he's been contributing as an editor to print, to iMagazine, Baseline, ID Magazine, and he now writes the Daily Heller for print magazine. He is a 1999 AIGA Medalist and a 2011 recipient of the Smithsonian National Design Award for Design Mind. His most current book with Greg Donofrio is called The Moderns, the Midcentury Graphic Design, which we will talk about today, which is a beautiful tribute to graphic design history. So, Stephen, you've had quite a career, which is still going strong, of course, from designer to art director to author and educator and so on. What do you attribute your success to?
Staying awake.
Staying awake?
But before we go on, I just got, your picture went away.
Oh, it has? Okay.
Yeah.
Guys, can you see me? Uh-oh. I guess I'm just going to keep, let's see, what do you guys, can you guys see me okay? You guys can see me.
Yeah, I can't.
Okay. Okay.
Well, but the answer to that is I love what I do, and I need to do something so I don't get in trouble on the street. So I have continued to do it for many years.
Great. Excellent. Okay, so Steve, if you can't see me, I'm going to just refresh and hopefully you can see me again, okay? Because we don't want to be talking just to my logo. Be right back.
It says waiting for Type Ed to reconnect.
Okay, you can see me now?
Yep, there you are. Yay.
Excellent, great. All right, so we might have to do that a couple times if you're having some issues. I want to ask you, where does your love of design originate?
Well, that's a good question. I think my love of design originates from my love of history. And it started first with caricature and cartoon. I've always loved caricatures, I've always loved cartoons, I've always loved illustration, and that's what I started doing when I was pretty young, very young, in fact. Mm-hmm. Doing cartoons was an escape from the realities of what life was for me back when I was young, which isn't to say it was terrible, it's just to say, like everybody else, preteen and teenagehood can be problematic. And I started writing about the history of caricature and cartoon while I was art directing, and that led me to design because there's a lot of crossover and a lot of people who did one did the other. And I also loved design because it was kind of Zen-like, you know, you cut little pieces of paper out and glue them onto things, and it felt like I was back in kindergarten. And I always loved kindergarten. I wish I could go back to kindergarten.
It was a playful time.
It was a soothing time.
It was a soothing time, right. So over 170 books, that's a lot. How do you choose your topics going forward?
I usually have an idea for something, and I try to figure out what that idea is best seen as, whether it's an article, whether it's a snippet of something, or whether it's a book. I just lost you again, by the way.
Oh.
So I have to be doing something. I mean, there's a compulsion to this. And so since I have to be doing something, and I don't like mowing the lawn, and I don't like digging holes in the garden, it has to be something that has some thinking behind it. And I've always loved books, and so I try to think of ways of making books. I try to think of ways of making books that suit my temperament and answer questions that I might have that either nobody's answered yet or nobody's raised yet. And out of that, usually there's a book that comes out. Or there are at least 5 ideas, and out of those 5 ideas, there's one book that pops up out of that.
Do you think it's sort of problem solving for you?
Well, it's problem solving in a very primitive way. I mean, it's not like somebody says to me, figure out how X equals Y out of Z plus Q. I look around and I say, there's a magazine, and that magazine has been saying something for 30, 40, 50, 100 years. I wonder what that magazine came from, why that magazine looks the way it looks, who contributed to that magazine, what's the magazine saying that has benefit to who. So there are always questions, and once I start asking those questions, I try to answer those questions in some way, shape, or form. So I guess it's problem solving, but there was a period of time when I used to balk at anybody who would call design problem solving. It seemed like one of those words or phrases like design thinking. I know design thinking exists, and I know that it makes sense, but for some reason it just rubs me wrong until it rubs me right.
Right.
And that's actually the genesis of the book, The Moderns.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I think of design thinking as just thinking. It's just common sense sometimes.
Right. You're still missing, by the way.
Okay, great. I will refresh one more time. Let's see. I'll be right.
Maybe it's me. I have a bad record with technology.
Well, I'm here. So
I think there you are again.
Okay.
Yay.
Yay. So I'll ask you one more question, and then we'll jump to some images, and then we can just take a look at the book. So what inspired you to write this book, The Moderns?
Well, The Moderns represents a kind of design that I've always rejected in the past. It gets convoluted, but I've always considered myself outside of the fray. When I was a kid, it was called rebellion. When you're an adult, it's kind of called arrogance. But modernism to me was 2 things. And one of those things was cold, corporate, geometric, ultra clean, ultra sterile design. And that's the way I kept it in my head. That's the picture that I gave to it. And at a certain point, I realized that so many of the designers whose work I really respect, in fact adore, come under the modernist umbrella. And then I started looking into the different shadows around modernism. And I found that some of the things that I kind of disliked in a knee-jerk sort of way, like geometry. I've never been a math fan, and I always felt that geometry and design was conceptual, that it was more about a system or a decoration than a concept. And when I realized I was fooling myself and that it was basically ignorance, I wanted to explore modernism to its fullest and see all the different ways that it manifests and all the individuals that were involved in making it and how they made it their own. And I'm not seeing you now. You went off.
Oh, okay. All right. So let me do this. Let me screen share. We'll take a look at the book. And guys, let me know if you can see me or if you can at least see the book. Can you see the screen share here, Stephen?
I can see the screen share,
Okay,
yeah.
great. So let's talk a little bit about this. Excellent. This way it's not focused on me so much. Can you just give us a quick summary of the book?
Sure. Well, first of all, I did the book with Greg D'Onofrio, and it was designed by Greg D'Onofrio and Patricia Bellin, his partner. They run Kind Design in New York. The reason we did the book together is he and Patricia had done two very important websites. One on Alvin Lustig, who is in the book, and the other on Elaine Lustig Cohen, who is not only in the book, but the book is dedicated to her since she passed away about 8 months ago. They are design documentarians. They are design historians. They're doing what I was doing years ago. They're doing it well, and I thought it would be fun to do a book with people I hadn't worked with before, and that modernism was something that they seemed to be very engaged with, both European and American. And so originally we were going to do the book in 2 volumes, one American and the other European. I think it will only be an American for a number of reasons. But the book came together over the course of maybe 2 years, where initially we were going to work with a group, kind of core group of 30 people, many whose names most designers know, like Paul Rand or Lester Beale or Joseph Albers. But then as we moved along, we found that there were a number of people working under this modern umbrella that we haven't seen a lot of. Monographs have not been written about them, and they played either a very essential role as originators or as propagators of the style and the approach.
Great. Okay. All right, so I'm just going through the images of the book. Guys, let me know if you can see everything. Sounds like there's some issues here. Some of you are on Firefox. So let us know if things are not coming through, because there's no reason to do this live if you guys cannot see it. So I'm just going to go through a couple areas here. You start off with an introduction about mid-century modern, and I noticed in an area here you write that the reduction of visual noise in everything from advertisements to book design was a stated goal of the more rigorous post-war graphic design moderns.
Right.
What were the moderns reacting to specifically?
Well, there were 2 things that the moderns were reacting to. In the United States, modernism was a reaction to classicism on the one side, which was, although in reality is not dry, seemed to be antiquated. Central axis composition, for example, is a key. Straight columns, substantial borders. I mean, these are just kind of technical conceits, but they were reacting to that. But even more so, they were reacting to commercialism. They were reacting to just finding typefaces that were bold and eye-catching and throwing them down on a layout without any thought behind it. Or the thought behind it was really just to punch the viewer in the nose, ham-fisted design. And round about the teens, the 20s, the 30s, designers started emerging that looked towards art as their inspiration. And the modernists in the early stage were influenced by the arts that were moving into our consciousness. They were into the Stil, they were into the Bauhaus, they were into expressionism. They were finding means of expressing themselves while at the same time presenting a message to the public. This was a European concept. In America, the concept was really hard sell. In Europe, the concept was soft sell. In America, the concept was exploit whatever you can to make capitalism work. In Europe, it was capitalism, or whatever the economic equivalent would be, could be done without such a ham-fisted approach.
Don't you think that's the same today?
It hasn't changed much. I mean, it's not like the modernists changed the world. In fact, as I said earlier, I always felt that modernism was a tool of the establishment, a tool of corporatism, a tool of globalism. But I found that there are degrees, and within those confines, even working for corporate clients, there was a possibility of doing something that would add enjoyment to the lives of the consumer, or enjoyment to the lives of the investor. Any little thing helps in a world like ours. And modernism was meant to clean up the world, but also spice up the world.
Thank you. All right, so we have a couple. What I want to do, guys, is go through a couple of the designers and talk about some of the designers and some of the insights that Stephen and Greg found while researching and writing the book. And then we'll jump into the questions, because I can already see we already have 9 questions. So if you have questions while we are going through the talk and through the interview, please drop them in the questions tab, and then also vote them up. We're just going to try to stay within an hour here. So I'd like to actually start with Albers.
Joseph Albers.
Yes.
Yeah, Joseph Albers is an interesting case because, first of all, he was a Bauhausian. He came to the United States. He started Black Mountain School and then went up to Yale and started the design department, art department up there. The only work that he did that was really commercial are the pieces that we show in this book, which are the command record covers that he did. Mm-hmm. And this is just to show how my brain worked. When I first saw these covers a decade or so ago, I thought anybody can do circles. Anybody could do rectangles and place them semi-randomly or place them on a grid and call it art. And it just sounds, even saying it, so ignorant to me. And I used to get into these arguments with people about form and content, and how content should supersede form. And when I got to know Paul Rand very well, he and I would argue about this stuff, and he would just say, "Your ideas are for the birds." That, form and content sometimes are one and the same, and sometimes they're not, and why should it matter? So the Joseph Albers work really does express the ideas that the albums are presenting, the musical ideas, except they're putting them into visual form. So provocative percussion is one of those 6 or 7 albums that he did that gives you the sense of movement and sound while being visual in an abstract manner. So the abstraction is not entirely abstract. There is meaning behind it. And that was something of a revelation for me.
I actually really love this cover. I mean, it's perfect for records. I'll just go through a couple other ones here. The persuasive percussion. These are great.
Yeah, I mean, they're so much fun. And I remember there was a short film that was narrated by Mel Brooks called The Critic. And I showed it at, I think it was the second or third AIGA conference in San Francisco. And I showed it because I thought it was making fun of or being sarcastic about abstract art and its superficiality. And instead, I came to realize that although it was a commentary, a comic commentary on abstraction, abstraction also could be as expressive as expressionism, let's say, or as expressive as a representational picture. So you look at the persuasive percussion on the top page there, those dots that are falling out of sequence, it's clear that there's a concept behind that piece of work. Whether he thought of that concept in terms of persuasive percussion or just thought of it in terms of thinking about art and design, and it applied well to persuasive percussion, doesn't even matter. It just works well. And the art director of Command, Charles Murphy, knew how to work with this kind of artwork.
Right. It already has an audio, it has a beat to it. It has both rhythm and outside of rhythm in it just by looking at it.
Exactly. And if you were, on your bed and you had drumsticks and you had marbles on the bed and you started banging on your mattress, the marbles would jump up in the air like that. So I often think of it as a mattress.
It's a great way to think of it. And then these ones as well.
Yeah, they're all very simple. They're using the most essential forms. As Paul Rand once said, what's better than geometry? What's more perfect than geometry? And here you have perfection, but you also have perfection that's a little skewed as well.
Okay, let's keep going. I wanted to talk about Sipe. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Sipe Pinellas.
Sipe, okay. All right. So what did you find out about Sipe?
Well, Sipe Pinellas I knew towards the end of her life. She was one of the early women art directors. There weren't a lot, and there certainly weren't a lot that made names for themselves. Pretty much New York, which was the center of graphic design in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, was a male club. Quite literally, Sipe was not even a member of the Art Directors Club until her husband, Bill Golden, said he would not accept an award if his wife wasn't a member of the club. And so she was a pioneer, in part because she was a woman in a man's world, but also because she gave so much work to many illustrators and designers. I was having dinner with Seymour Quast the other night, and he said that Sipe was the first person to give him a job, which ultimately led to Pushpin Studios, which ultimately led to a piece of history. I remember other illustrators I knew at the time, and fine artists too, like Charles Gwathmey was given an illustration job by Sipe. So she changed the way designers, art directors thought of magazine design and magazine visual content. And for that alone, she deserves accolades. For being a woman as well, she deserves accolades at the time she was practicing. I met her when she was kind of coming down. She was older. She was doing some work for Otis Parsons. She was teaching a class at Parsons. And I remember going to visit her class as a guest speaker and how disrespectful the students were to her, in part because of her age. And, when I remember being young and feeling similarly about older people, I'm an older people now, and I sometimes feel that way. So, but, the contribution that she and others of her era made was important to American visual culture. And so she holds a place of high esteem in the book.
Right, and because she's an editorial designer, I want to see or get your take on her use of typography.
Well, first of all, as a magazine designer, there's great elegance in the use of typography. She allowed her type in her magazine layouts to speak, to have a voice, but it was the totality, it was the entire publication that she made into something that had a personality, whether it was Charm or 17 or Overseas Woman or whatever she was working on. Typographically, when she did one-offs, she worked within the modern vocabulary, which is clean, often sans serif type, but sometimes elegant Bedonis and Didots.
Keep going here. All right, so
this one's a Vogue, but that Vogue cover, while beautiful, is also something that other designers were doing, taking objects and making letters out of them. So it wasn't, she didn't pioneer it, but she sure did it well.
It is beautiful. Okay, so let's talk about Alvin Lustig. Let's see.
Yeah. Alvin Lustig is, I just actually gave a lecture on Alvin to my students here at SVA. There were so many designers who were working in the 40s and 50s who got lost under the covers, so to speak, by the 80s and 90s, because they seemed to be old-fashioned, because they seemed to have no longer any stylistic validity or authority. And those of us who were looking askew in those days were so wrong. It's the disease of the young to kind of avoid the old methods. And even though retro is a kind of popular style in graphic design, looking at somebody's older work and thinking of it as retro is a tacit insult. Alvin Lustig was a Renaissance figure. He was best known for his book jackets. He passed away at age 45. He had juvenile diabetes. He worked first as a typographer, working with letterpress, and so many of the pieces, including the two of the pieces you're showing right now, used typecase materials in the same way that the constructivists in Russia during the teens and 20s used it to construct designs, to construct letter forms, to construct visual aids. But he ran through a number of different styles, a number of different methodologies, which was also a hallmark of modernism, that you didn't have to stick to one particular thing. Often Norman Rockwell is looked at as an exemplar of somebody who stuck to one thing and never went any further, and was hailed for it. But the modernists were among those that took chances, that experimented, that went in very different directions even within their own work.
Great.
And so if you look at the material that we have in the book on Lustig, you see a wide range of influences. The covers on the far left have an inspiration that comes out of Paul Klee and Juan Miró and others. He's not copying them, but he's influenced by them, and there is a very important difference. The cover on the lower right-hand corner is one of those typecase material covers from when he was a typographer in Los Angeles. It's related to turn of the century and 19-teens and 20s work, but it's his own vocabulary. The one above it, the Lorca cover, is unique to him. using sand to create a hand-lettered form, Lorca, using that kind of comic strip panel approach to tell a story in sequence was one of his inventions. So there was a lot going on with him in terms of graphic design, but also, as I said, he was a Renaissance guy. He did architecture, he did furniture design, he did textile design, he designed a helicopter. There was so much to him as a creator, which is also part of the modernist code. These modernists did more than just do their commercial art. They did a wide range of things. They were the true originators of design entrepreneurship.
Right. I want to also remind the young designers that are with us today that this was all done in paste up, that this wasn't something that was done on the computer. I know sometimes my students forget that it's not just, you know, I mean, outside of the idea, there's also a production element that takes a while to put it together.
Well, there's that wonderful movie on the old methods of makeup, and I lived through those things. And while they seem time-consuming and old-fashioned today, they are time-consuming and old-fashioned, but they were also the state of the art at the time. So when I was doing paste up, I never thought, wouldn't it be great if there was a machine called a computer that gave you templates to work with and style sheets so you didn't have to do this paste up. Paste up was kind of fun. Paste up, even seeing something at the end of the day printed and it was a little askew, a little crooked, there was a certain satisfaction in that.
Probably because you were using your hands to make design. It wasn't just...
Well, sometimes I was using my feet. It depended on what I was doing at the moment.
Of course. So, Steve, I want to ask you if there was one other designer you want to talk about from our list, or shall I just choose one?
Just choose.
Okay, so I'll do one just because we're here in Los Angeles. Deborah Sussman.
Deborah Sussman, she was fantastic. She was born and raised a modernist, so to speak. She went to the Chicago Bauhaus. She worked for the Eameses. But what's great about her work, from my perspective, in the definition of modernism, is it goes beyond the cliche of modernism. It's not as clean as clean can be. It was, it had its quirks. There was a certain eclectic quality to it. Her color sense was not primary colors, they were pastels, and she used colors that weren't being used. She was as much about the pushpin aesthetic, and Pushpin Studios is not in this book because they were avowedly not modernistic or modern. But Deborah worked with an eclectic array of forms, but always came back to her roots as a modern, as somebody who looked at design as a way to clean up the world rather than clutter up the world.
Right. These are really gorgeous layouts.
She was good. It's a shame she passed a couple of years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Great.
And of course, she was known for her work and got an AIGA medal for the San Francisco, or was it Los Angeles Olympics, Summer Olympics, LA Summer Olympics, which was a revolution in terms of Olympic branding, and it was kind of the launching of the West Coast style. Happy, it was happy.
Right. Okay, well, I'll close this. Thank you again for going over that. And can you see me now, or should I?
I see you as a still photograph.
Okay. So I'm going to refresh and then we'll get to the questions here. Be right back.
I'd sing for you, but it would probably drive everybody away. Somebody just asked if I would sing. No, I'm really not going to.
I saw that, you guys. Okay, so we'll go through some of the questions. Hopefully you can see me now. Stephen, apologies for the technical issues. Okay.
I'll sing the praises of good design. Somebody just said that. Actually, I am very sad about Tom Petty, who was also a West Coaster. And I was just watching him on a film last night and then heard this morning that he died. So that is very depressing for me.
Yeah, it's very sad. Okay, so we'll go through some of the questions. Let's see, Martin, we're going to answer your question. Do you see any parallels in current design trends with the ones in the past? If so, any stand out specifically?
Well, first of all, I try not to use the word design trends, although it's impossible not to really think of them as trends. Usually when there is a trend, you have to stand back and wait a while and see whether it becomes anything more than a fashion. But do I see anything that's similar? I see that designers will always reuse what they've seen before. So whereas 20 or 30 years ago, there were no history books, there are dozens of them now, and designers go to them like a big closet, and they pull out things and they use them. And that'll be the case forever. I mean, it's like the fashion industry. They're always taking from the past and bringing to the present. And sometimes it works beautifully, and sometimes it just seems derivative. But I think there are some unique things that are going on now. Seymour Quast and I are doing the final edition of our book, Graphic Style, which is going into its 4th edition and will not have any more editions. But the new section is called hipster, which was a term that came up from his assistant. I was going to call it the New Order, which addressed literally order, but also the Trump era. And she said that there's a sense of hipsterism in design now. And since she's much, much younger than me, I take it as fact. But what I'm looking at basically is a trend in information design. And information design comes in many different forms, but primarily there's a vector quality to it. And as a form and as a medium, information is clearly 21st century and this second decade of the 21st century. Vector itself, that kind of clean, illustrative approach, is more about this period of the last 10 years than it was the previous 10 years. Mm-hmm. Although there are relationships that can be made to the past. You can find the past in almost anything.
That's right. And I actually see some of the work in the Modernist book, in the Moderns book, that look like vector art.
Yeah, there's clean edges and right angles, and that was all part of it.
Right. Great. Thank you, Martin, for asking that question. We have a question from Alexandra. What is your thought process, and how does your creative process work?
My thought process is I try to go to sleep at night and can't. Because once the door is open, things flow in. And sometimes I remember them in the morning and sometimes I don't. My thought process is always trying to be a little lunatic in a way, because I don't really see myself as orderly. I don't see myself as really linear. I think circuitously, and then somehow in that circle I try to pull something out and put it down on a table and examine it for a while and then see if I can use it for anything. So it's kind of like one of those Japanese restaurants that has the conveyor belt where the thing goes around, the food goes around, and you can pick it whenever you want to. And sometimes I think, this has gone around 13 times. It must be stale by now. And that's the one I usually pick.
Well, there's a reason why it keeps coming in front of you, right?
Yeah.
Keep coming around that conveyor belt. That is a creative process. Very, very good. Thank you, Alexandra, for asking that question. Shannon has a question from her students. In what way has your perspective on design shifted most since the beginning of your career to where you are now?
Well, part of it is seen in this the modern book. I was always kind of anti-decorative, and I was always pro-content, and the content I was pro had to have some political or social underpinning. There were certain formal things that I was more interested in, like randomized typography and hand lettering, and then I became interested in more cleanly grid-locked work. So fortunately, I've been able to change my opinion about many things. I mean, there's something I became known for now about 20, maybe more years ago, called The Cult of the Ugly, which was an essay that I wrote for I Magazine, for Rick Poynter. And it got the ire of many younger designers who must have thought I was twice my age because I was so stuffy. And I came around within a number of years to seeing how narrow-minded I was about that era of digital typography and expressive typography. And I think that's what happens over time. You change your attitudes, hopefully, and you see things that you weren't seeing before because you want to see them. You want to see more. I'm grateful that I am what is referred to as a liberal, which means my mind is always open and maybe sometimes too open. And I've lost you, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Back to type ed.
Back to type ed. Okay. Are you?
Sounds like Mr. Ed.
Kind of. Thank you, Shannon, for asking that question. Okay, so I can refresh so you can see me, Stephen, and then we will probably do a couple more questions. They're working now?
There, you're back.
So yeah, guys, let me know if I'm going out. Some people see me, some people don't. It's, you know, technology, right? Okay.
Either that or you're in the spirit world.
Possibly. So Peter asked a question. Dietmar Winkler once told me the Bauhaus typographic educational model is the least intelligent and the most unfortunate way to educate young graphic designers. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this statement.
That's a very interesting statement and a very interesting question, and I honestly can't answer it.
Okay.
I didn't go to design school. I barely went to college. I kept getting thrown out. So I never learned typography. I never learned about type. I never learned the nuances of type. I picked it up. I can't say that I'm good at it. One of the reasons I became an art director was because I couldn't design as well as many of the people I was working with, in part because of my lack of education, and in part maybe it just wasn't there to begin with. So I don't know what the best way of learning type is. I hire people to teach type. I work with people who teach type very well, but and I watch students learn type and typography and learn how to make type, particularly now, which was not possible when there was no computer.
Mm.
But I don't take part in it. So it's an answer that I can't give.
Okay. Thank you for considering it, though.
I'm going to consider it a lot.
All right. So Sarah asks, what do you feel is the potential of graphic design sculpting and advancing societal norms? Do you feel that potential is currently being realized?
Well, I think graphic design, like any tool of propaganda, is there to convey message and sometimes manipulate thought. So it really depends on what the graphic design is being used for. When you do a logo, it's not the logo that's going to be significant. It's going to be what that logo represents.
Right.
There are times, however, you can make, well, I'll give this example. Milton Glaser, who teaches in the MFA Designer as Author and Entrepreneur program, and has for a long time, gave his students, my students, a problem. Half of the class had to design an anti-Trump campaign, and the other had to design a pro-Trump campaign for 2020. Turned out that the pro-Trump campaign, even though they were quite apologetic, was really very convincing. And in that sense, they did an amazing job, but it teaches you, as so many other episodes in history teach you, that the way things look and the way things that are presented, whether it's through graphic design or some other form of image making, has potential power. And one of the books I wrote is called Iron Fists, Branding the 20th Century Totalitarian State. And I often say that one of the reasons I did the book was a kind of fetishism, that I was taken by so many of these evil powers, beautiful graphics. So in that sense, they're doing a disservice to the world, but a great service to their cause. And those ambiguities exist all the time in our field. We have to be responsible for what we do and who we do it for and what we're saying. Definitely,
I agree. Excellent. Very cool. So thank you so much, Sarah, for asking that question. Steve, is there one more question okay with you?
As many as you like.
Oh, okay.
Nobody's knocking on my door yet, so I guess they don't want me.
Daniel asks, I read about Stephen getting up early at 3 a.m. every day, and this is what made it possible for him to do all the brilliant work on books and design history that he has done. Is that true?
Well, 3 o'clock is a little early. I did at one point get up at 3 o'clock every day when I was at the Times, and it got very tiring and I fell asleep in the middle of the day. I sometimes have trouble sleeping, so I'm up, but I'm not productive. I do wake up early and I get into the office early, but everybody has their body rhythms. So what I do at, let's say, 7 o'clock or 7:30, somebody else probably can do at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock midnight in the evening. So I think ultimately it's not about the time, it's about, you know, the interest, the effort, and the inspiration.
Right. Well, I am always amazed that you can do as much as you do.
Well, I'm beginning to do less.
Okay, that's good. We'll do one more question from the students, from Shannon's students. How do you see the role of technology changing the future of design? Do you think design can be automated?
Well, I think there is a certain amount of automation already. But technology has, I mean, we could spend an hour on this, or maybe a lifetime on this. Technology has always altered how design works. The technology of printing changed the way the world saw, thought, read, and that was over 500 years ago. The new technologies have changed the definition of design. I mean, the term graphic design is still valid, but at the same time, it's also something of an anachronism, at least the way it's formulated. Probably none of you out there are just doing print design. Some of you may not even be doing print design at all, and just working on screen. The terminology is problematic. The technology is going to move you into other places. My son is a filmmaker. If he were born 10 years earlier, he might have been a graphic designer. It's just the nature of things. I feel, sadly, a loss of the thing that I grew up with, but I feel overjoyed when I see people working to their fullest with the new technologies. And I'm excited to see what will come next year, the year before, after that, and the year after that. We've jumped so quickly. I mean, I used to think of my grandparents when they came to this country, and we bought them for their 50th anniversary a color television set. That made me want to go to their house a lot more. But they came over when there were no airplanes. They came over when there was barely radio, and now they had a color TV set.
Wow. I know technology moves fast. Let's see. I know. And did you see the Graphic Means, Breyer Levitt's movie, The Graphic Means? Did you watch the final?
I'm actually in it.
I know you're in it, but did you watch the final?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. It's great.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's very good. We did have a screening a couple of months ago. She was here and it was great. Excellent. Well, I wanted to say thank you so much, Steve, and we're going to finish off here. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but we want to make sure that we are respectful of everyone's time. So often we go over, and we want to make sure that you were able to get enough from this. So glad to hear that you enjoyed it. Steve, thank you so much that you're heading off to teach. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And guys, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the Typography Dojo Facebook group. Also, there is a link right underneath to visit Heller Books, find out more about Stephen and his work and his books and all the thousands of things that he does.
Thank you.
Yes. Guys, have a good day. And Stephen, thank you so much for your time again.
Thanks very much. It was a pleasure, and you're terrific doing it.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye. Have a good day.